Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to a Blood Splattered vlog. Now unlike usual, I'm going to be riding solo this week because I'm out of town visiting my family and because Count Jackula is intentionally avoiding this movie for reasons you can find in this video here. I'm not going to go over it right now, but suffice it to say, his reasons are pretty much the same reasons why it took me so long to see this movie. Anyway, if you're watching this video though, then you're very aware that I did eventually see this movie, and I'm now here to talk about my rather complicated thoughts surrounding it, so bear with me for a bit. Before we get into spoilers though, I want to mention that I am not exactly someone who is anti-remake, though some people might have that perception of me because there are plenty of remakes I have raged about in the past, especially on social media. But for example, some remakes I really loved were The Hills of Eyes, Evil Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Piranha 3D is hands down one of the greatest fucking remakes I've ever seen. That movie is the bee's knees. And on top of that, I was actually really looking forward to this movie despite all the fucking vitriol from SJWs and MRAs surrounding the movie. Like, I actually thought the original trailer and the international version of it were legitimately funny. Yeah, I know I was in the minority there, but I don't know what to say. I guess I was just optimistic. So when I say I really didn't like this movie, it's not coming from a anti-reboot or remake mentality, but more of a anti-movies that fall apart mentality. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here, so let's first start off with some spoiler-free thoughts. The best way I can describe this movie is that it feels like a bunch of really funny and talented comedians trying to make up for a really terrible script. Everyone in the cast is clearly having a blast and doing a reasonable job of bringing humor to situations that probably didn't even have any in the script. But unfortunately, while some of the humor was really fucking fantastic, like everything with Chris Hemsworth and Kate McKinnon and Leslie Jones was fucking gold, there was a lot of humor that fell flat, like we're talking pin drop flat. I swear, at one point in the movie, I thought I could hear fucking crickets outside, and that's never a good sign in a comedy. Because this is one of those improv comedy movies, which normally I like, I really love This Is the End, Bridesmaids, and The Night Before, in this movie, a lot of the improv situations carry on just a little bit too long, and unfortunately, when they're not funny to begin with, they don't really become more funny through repetition. In fact, it just kind of becomes annoying. But let's hold back on the negativity for a bit and talk about some of the things I really liked about the movie. I really liked the first 30 minutes of this movie when the Ghostbusters were first getting together and investigating the mansion and then investigating the subway tunnel and encountering their first ghosts. All that stuff was actually legitimately well done. There was some decent tension, there was some decent humor, and the new characters I was actually really growing to like, especially Holtzman and Patty. Those two characters are probably my favorite mainly because they were the characters that stayed consistent throughout the movie. Like the other two characters I kind of felt like would improv themselves out of character too much to where I kind of lost track of who they were supposed to be. Whereas Patty and Holtzman were just three-dimensional, really well done characters, and I appreciated them for that reason. I really liked a lot of the new Ghostbusters gadgets. Some of those were really cool, though I didn't like that all of a sudden the gadgets now kill. I mean, the movie does have a scene where they explain when Holtzman is putting them together that, oh yeah, these will neutralize the ghosts. I just didn't like that they did. Now, it could very well be that I'm misremembering a lot of the old Ghostbusters stuff. I was mainly a fan of the first two movies and only vaguely watched the real Ghostbusters, but from the original two movies, I kind of liked that the Ghostbusters didn't use weapons, they mainly used containment tools, and they only became weapons when they did something they weren't supposed to do with them, and that was cross the streams. That all being said, I did like that the movie wasn't a complete rehash of the original movie, because that would have just made it feel super pointless. But unfortunately, that covers just about everything that I liked about the movie, and almost everything else I didn't like very much. But before I talk about that, I should first issue a spoiler warning because I can't talk about the stuff I didn't like without revealing some crucial plot details. So here is your warning. Alright, now when the movie starts to go sour for me is about halfway through when it switches from the origin story to the main villain plot. Because up to that point, the movie felt reasonably paced, but once it starts going into the villain Rohan's whole deal, it really starts to feel rushed. Like, it legitimately feels like there might be scenes missing. Like, we start jumping from plot point to plot point so fast that you barely have time to register what's going on. And there were times where I was actually really confused why the Ghostbusters knew more than it seemed like the movie indicated they did at certain points. Like, it feels like they kind of already figure out Rohan's whole plan before he even encounters them, and that was really baffling. But the main thing I don't like is Rohan himself. He is, there's really no other way to say it. He feels like a straight-up middle finger to old-school Ghostbusters fans. Now, I had heard some people say that's what the villain of this movie was, and I kind of took it with a grain of salt because a lot of people exaggerate or interpret things weird, but finally having seen the movie, it was really hard to unsee. Because basically he is this bullied nerd who has decided to get back on the world, and he goes about this using technology that he stole from the Ghostbusters because he was a fan of their original book that they wrote before they became the Ghostbusters. Which started to sound a whole lot to me like they were referring to that book as if it was the original movie. Therefore, Rohan would be me, or anyone like me that was a bullied nerd that really liked the original Ghostbusters. Now, normally I wouldn't make an assumption like that, but after the whole hoopla surrounding the movie, after the way people who were defending this movie treated people like James Rolfe, and after a lot of Paul Feig's comments about nerds and nerd culture, yeah, I'm starting to believe this was an intentional parallel. And it doesn't help that the movie actually calls attention to a lot of the online hate the movie got in the movie itself, so it doesn't want me to forget about that. It wants me thinking about that throughout the running time, so, what other conclusion could I draw here? This is a movie about the Ghostbusters that hates fans of the Ghostbusters, to which I gotta say, fuck you. No, seriously, this movie can kiss my ass. I almost walked out right then and there when they made that revelation about the original book, because I was like, oh, what the... I was willing to defend this movie up to that point. In fact, I was enjoying it even though it was feeling very rushed in that second act up to that point. But once that happened, no, I couldn't unsee it. Like, the movie could burn in fucking hell as far as I'm concerned. Now, to be fair, Rohan is part of an archetype that is very common in movies. He's basically the same as the villain from The Incredibles, or to a certain extent, Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens. That being the nerdy fanboy who turns villain when he doesn't get what he wants, which granted is a decent parallel for the backlash this movie got, because there was a whole lot of people that seemed to not like the fact that this movie was being remade with women. I was not one of those people, but I still felt very insulted by this decision to make the villain a parallel for all of us that were defensive of the original movie, given how much this movie meant to all of us. Like, for me, Ghostbusters is one of those movies that my mom used to put on when I was a little kid. Like, I don't even remember the first time I saw Ghostbusters because she put it on when I was so young, and I watched it about 1,000,000 times, and I got, like, it and Ghostbusters 2 practically memorized at this point. It was probably the first horror comedy I fell in love with, to be honest. So to watch a director and a film crew take an original movie that meant so much to people like me as a kid, and then not only remake it, which already puts us on edge because there's been so many really awful remakes lately, stuff like RoboCop and Total Recall and Ninja Turtles are fucking unforgivable. But then on top of that, they make the villain of the movie us. They make it people like me. People who have been bullied and might have found solace in Ghostbusters. No, I'm not cool with that. I'm not cool with that at all. But before I get way too emotional, I'll move on and talk about some other elements in this movie I didn't like very much. Now, most of you probably already know this at this point, but all the actors that were in the original Ghostbusters who are still alive, with the exception of Rick Moranis, actually have cameos in this movie. And when I first heard that, I actually thought that was a nice little bone to throw fans. But what I found is that every time they showed up in this movie, I found myself really wishing that this was a sequel and not a reboot. Because all I kept thinking was, if instead of Bill Murray being this random fucking TV psychologist that felt really shoehorned into the movie, if he was Venkman coming to pass the torch to these new girls who were all really big Ghostbusters fans, basically making the girls like all of us that grew up watching the movies. Heck, you could even open up the movie with one of the girls watching on TV as the Ghostbusters defeat the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or something and be like, I want to grow up and be a Ghostbuster. That would have been beautiful. That would have been awesome. Basically do what the Muppets did. That would have been... Holy shit, like, man, I would have been so much more on board with this movie had they done that. But unfortunately, every time the cameos show up, I just kept thinking, like, why aren't I just watching that original movie? Like, it's so perfect, and this movie is so all over the place. And on top of that, there are some cameos in this movie from people that weren't in the original movie. Like, there's a cameo from Ozzy Osbourne, and you guys know me, I'm one of the biggest Ozzy Osbourne fans on the planet, but that cameo couldn't have felt more forced if it was in fucking Star Wars. Anyway, to wrap this up, Ghostbusters is worth a rental if you're curious or if you've liked all the things you've heard other people say about the movie. But if you're a hardcore Ghostbusters fan like myself, see it with extreme caution, because while I know some people that are some of the biggest fans on the fucking planet and they still liked it, I felt personally slighted by this movie in a way I have not felt in a long time. In fact, the last time I kind of felt this way about a movie was Funny Games, which could basically be translated to fuck you horror fan the movie, despite being a horror movie itself, which makes it really aggravating. Anyway, if I don't stop now, I'm just gonna keep repeating the same points over and over again. So, peace out, my fellow gorehounds, and I'll catch y'all later.